If you walk into any commercial gym today, what is the first thing you notice? You see the aesthetic obsession, the mirror selfies, the perfectly curated workout outfits, the endless pursuit of looking a certain way. For decades, modern society has treated muscle like a cosmetic accessory. It is something we pursue for appearance, maybe for athletic ego, but rarely do we think of it as a matter of pure biological survival. But what if we have completely misunderstood the most abundant tissue in the human body? What if muscle is not just about lifting heavy things or looking good on a beach, but is actually the most important longevity organ we possess?
That is exactly the paradigm shift happening in metabolic science right now. We have historically viewed skeletal muscle as merely mechanical. We thought of it as the engine and the pulleys that move the skeleton around. But that is such a primitive understanding of human physiology. Muscle is not just inert tissue waiting to be flexed. It is a highly dynamic, incredibly intelligent biological defense system. When we look at the molecular level, we are realizing that muscle regulates almost everything that dictates how well and how long we live.
That is a fascinating way to frame it. A biological defense system. It completely flips the script. We usually think of the immune system or the liver as our defenders. But you are saying that skeletal muscle is actively communicating with the rest of the body to keep us alive. How exactly is it doing that? Because when I think of muscle, I just think of physical mass.
And that is the grand illusion. Muscle is actually an endocrine organ. In fact, it is the largest endocrine organ in the human body. When you contract your muscles, they do not just burn calories, they manufacture and release biochemical signaling molecules called myokines. These myokines flood into your bloodstream and travel to your brain, your liver, your immune system, and your bones. They actively regulate systemic inflammation, they stimulate the creation of new brain cells, and they optimize mitochondrial health. Movement literally changes your internal chemistry.
So, if I am understanding this correctly, every time we exercise, we are essentially turning our muscles into a pharmaceutical factory. We are manufacturing our own medicine from the inside out.
Precisely. Exercise is not just about burning off the donut you ate for breakfast. That is a massive oversimplification. Exercise is biochemical communication. When you are sedentary, that pharmacy shuts down. The myokines stop flowing. And without those anti-inflammatory signals, the body slowly begins to rust from the inside. This is why we see such a strong correlation between low muscle mass and chronic inflammation.
That makes me think about the modern lifestyle in a rather terrifying new light. Most of us spend 8 to 10 hours a day sitting in front of screens, essentially telling our internal pharmacy to stay closed. But let us talk about another massive crisis right now: metabolic health. We hear constantly about insulin resistance, prediabetes, and metabolic dysfunction. How does muscle tie into the way our bodies handle energy and sugar?
This is perhaps where muscle does its most critical work. Skeletal muscle is the body's primary glucose reservoir. Think of your muscles as a massive metabolic sponge. When you eat a meal, especially one high in carbohydrates, your blood sugar spikes. Your body releases insulin to clear that sugar out of the bloodstream, because high blood sugar is incredibly toxic to your blood vessels and organs. Well, where does that sugar go? Up to 80% of that glucose is supposed to be absorbed by skeletal muscle.
So if you have less muscle mass, you essentially have a smaller sponge?
Exactly. If your sponge is small, or if it is already full because you never empty it through physical activity, that glucose has nowhere to go. It backs up into the bloodstream. The pancreas has to pump out more and more insulin to force the sugar into the cells, and over time, the cells stop responding. That is insulin resistance. When muscle mass declines, metabolic flexibility declines right along with it. The body becomes completely inefficient at handling energy.
That is a profound visualization. It means that muscle is literally protecting our bloodstream from metabolic chaos. It is acting as a buffer. If you lack that buffer, every meal becomes a stressful event for your physiology.
It does. And this brings us to the concept of aging. As humans age, we naturally go through a process called sarcopenia, which is the age-related loss of muscle mass and strength. It usually starts in our 30s and accelerates significantly after age 60. But here is the tragedy. Modern medicine often treats this decline as inevitable. We accept frailty as a normal part of getting older. But Losing lean mass correlates strongly with reduced resilience, poor recovery from illness, and a dramatically increased risk of all-cause mortality.
It sounds like muscle is a biological insurance policy. If you get sick or if you fall, having that reserve capacity is the difference between bouncing back and a downward spiral.
It is the ultimate insurance policy. Let us say a 70-year-old catches a severe virus or suffers a fall that puts them in a hospital bed for 2 weeks. When you are bedridden, you lose muscle mass at an astonishing rate. If that individual went into the hospital with a low baseline of muscle, that 2-week stay might strip away whatever functional independence they had left. They might never walk unassisted again. But if they had built a strong foundation of lean mass, if they had paid their premiums into that biological insurance policy, they have the structural reserve to survive the catabolic stress of illness and recover.
That word catabolic is interesting. The body seems to constantly be in a tug of war between building itself up and breaking itself down. How does this balance actually work on a day-to-day basis?
Human physiology is a continuous cycle of protein synthesis and protein degradation. We are never static. We are either anabolic, which means we are building and repairing tissue, or we are catabolic, which means we are breaking it down. To support synthesis, we need resistance training, adequate dietary protein, deep sleep, and healthy hormonal balance. But on the other side of the seesaw, we have modern life.
Let me guess. Stress, sitting all day, and doom scrolling late at night.
You nailed it. Chronic psychological stress elevates cortisol, which is highly catabolic. It literally breaks down muscle tissue for quick energy. Add to that sedentary behavior, poor nutrition, and sleep deprivation, and you have a recipe for accelerated muscle loss. Longevity is not just about avoiding disease. It is about maintaining this anabolic balance over decades. If you are constantly in a state of breakdown, you are accelerating the aging process at a cellular level.
It is almost as if aging itself is just a progressive loss of our anabolic resilience. We lose the ability to rebuild. And looking at modern civilization, it feels like our environment is increasingly hostile to muscle preservation. Everything is engineered for comfort. We do not have to carry groceries. We do not have to do manual labor. We barely even have to stand up to turn off the lights anymore.
We have engineered movement out of existence, and the result is a biological catastrophe. We are living in a bizarre historical anomaly where humans are simultaneously overfed and undermuscled. We have an abundance of cheap, calorie-dense, nutrient-poor calories, but a severe deficit of physical exertion. This creates a hidden metabolic fragility. You can look relatively normal on the outside. You might not even be clinically obese, but beneath the surface, your muscle tissue is depleted and your metabolic engine is stalling.
Overfed and undermuscled. That perfectly encapsulates the modern health crisis. It makes me wonder about the societal cost of this. We pour trillions of dollars into managing chronic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, but it seems like we are just treating the symptoms of lost lean tissue.
That is a profoundly important observation. If we shifted our focus from merely managing the symptoms of metabolic dysfunction to aggressively preserving skeletal muscle from a young age, the landscape of global healthcare would transform. And a massive part of that equation, which we cannot ignore, is nutrition, specifically protein.
I am glad you brought up protein because there is so much conflicting information out there. Some people say we eat too much of it, others say not enough. How does protein actually interact with this longevity equation, especially as we get older?
The role of protein becomes increasingly critical with age. Remember that tug of war between synthesis and breakdown? Well, as we age, our muscles experience something called anabolic resistance. This means that an older adult actually needs a stronger stimulus, more dietary protein, and more resistance training to trigger the exact same amount of muscle protein synthesis as a 20-year-old.
So a 60-year-old eating the same chicken breast as a 20-year-old is actually extracting less muscle building value from it?
Exactly. Their cellular machinery is less sensitive to the amino acids. Adequate protein is non-negotiable because it provides the essential building blocks not just for muscle maintenance, but for immune function and cellular repair. Furthermore, preserving muscle directly preserves your mitochondria, the powerhouses of your cells. Skeletal muscle is packed with mitochondria. When you lose muscle, you lose your structural energy systems. You lose your vitality.
It really reframes the entire concept of human fitness. For so long, the fitness industry has sold us this idea that working out is about vanity. It is about getting a six-pack for the summer or fitting into a certain dress size. But listening to you, it seems like fitness culture has completely misunderstood its own product.
It has. The goal of building muscle is not appearance. Appearance is just a side effect. The true goal is biological resilience. It is about metabolic stability, hormonal integrity, and cognitive preservation. When you do a heavy deadlift or a squat, you are not just building your glutes or your back. You are depositing currency into a biological investment account that will pay dividends when you are 80 years old.
Meaning that strength training is not a hobby. It is quite literally preventive medicine.
It is the most potent preventive medicine we have ever discovered. No drug on the market can simultaneously improve insulin sensitivity, increase bone density, lower systemic inflammation, and release neuroprotective chemicals into the brain. Only skeletal muscle can do that.
It makes you realize that muscle was never about vanity at all. It is one of the body's oldest, most sophisticated survival technologies. We evolved to move, to lift, to carry, and to endure. When we stop doing those things, we are basically signaling to our DNA that we are no longer needed.
That is the chilling truth of it. Deep inside the human organism, muscle protects metabolism, it protects mobility, and it protects resilience itself. The future of longevity is not going to be found in a magic pill, and it is not about chasing some sci-fi version of immortality. It begins with something much more fundamental. It begins with preserving the biological armor that is already built into the human body.
It is a profound realization. We spend so much time looking for external solutions, wearable trackers, complex supplements, the latest biohacking trends. But the ultimate technology is already inside us, waiting to be activated through effort and resistance. The real question is whether we have the discipline to maintain that armor in a world that constantly invites us to be soft. Thank you for completely changing the way we look at human performance and aging today.
It is a conversation we urgently need to keep having. The armor is there, we just have to forge it.
This is Oxyzen Health Intelligence. Keep moving, keep building, and rethink what it means to be truly strong.